The aliens had spent centuries preparing for war against humanity. They thought we were the most dangerous species in the universe. But when they finally made contact, they realized something terrifying: humans did not have a hive mind at all. The Zulkor were an ancient race, masters of interstellar conquest. Their society functioned as one, every thought, every decision, every action synchronized through their collective hive mind. There were no disagreements, no conflicts, no deviations from the greater goal. To them, this was the only way a civilization could survive. But then, they learned about humans. For centuries, fragmented radio signals from Earth had baffled them. Unlike other species that followed a predictable pattern of thought and development, humanity was chaotic. Their broadcasts contained contradictions, one moment speaking of unity and cooperation, the next of war and rebellion. Their words, their actions, their history, it was a mess of conflict and contradiction. And yet, they thrived. They expanded, adapted, conquered the void of space itself. To the Zulkor, there was only one explanation: humans must have a hive mind. How else could such a fractured species achieve so much? How could they overcome their own disagreements, build vast empires, and spread across the stars? The answer seemed clear: they were secretly connected. Their emotions, their will, their choices, all part of a grand illusion. The Zulkor High Council debated endlessly, their thoughts flowing through the collective as one. A terrifying question remained unanswered. If their hive mind is more advanced than ours, are they stronger than us? A decision was made. Dravkan, one of their most intelligent scientists, was sent to Earth. His mission, to confirm whether humans truly shared a hive link, or if they were hiding something far worse. The infiltration. Dravkan's ship descended silently, cloaked from human eyes. He had studied their culture, their languages, even their mannerisms. Using advanced morphing technology, he took the form of a human, a middle-aged man with an unremarkable face, blending seamlessly into the crowd. His first destination, a human city. He walked among them, observing. Humans spoke freely, their voices clashing, their opinions clashing. This was not hive communication. They laughed at each other, argued in the streets, debated on glowing screens, even insulted their leaders. He watched in stunned silence as two men stood nose to nose on a street corner, voices raised, jabbing fingers at each other. If they share a collective mind, why do they fight? Dravkan expected a higher force to intervene, to silence the dissenters, to enforce unity. Nothing happened. Instead, one man stormed off, the other muttering to himself before walking the opposite direction. No punishment. No correction. No hive connection. A sense of unease crept into Dravkan's mind. The Zulkor High Council had been wrong. Humans were not a hive mind. They were something far worse. They were individuals. And yet, somehow, they still stood together. Dravkan had been trained for this. He had prepared for years, studying every piece of data the Zulkor High Council had collected about humans. His mission was to confirm what they feared most, that humans were bound together by a higher, more advanced hive mind than theirs. But what he saw was pure chaos. Walking the streets of this human city, he watched as no two people seemed to think alike. Some walked briskly, eyes locked onto strange glowing rectangles in their hands. Others laughed in groups, engaged in conversation. Some sat alone on benches, lost in thought. Nothing about them was synchronized. And then there were the arguments. Humans disagreed on everything: what food to eat, how to dress, who should rule over them. He had spent the morning watching political debates on their screens, one leader saying one thing, another calling him a fool. Citizens in the comments disagreed just as much. No hive mind would allow such division, Dravkan thought. Yet despite their conflict, they still thrived. Reporting back to the Zulkor. That night, in a secluded alleyway, Dravkan activated his hidden communicator. The High Council responded instantly, their thoughts flowing into his mind as a unified voice. "Report, Dravkan. Have you confirmed their Hive link?" He hesitated. How could he explain what he had seen? "There is no Hive link," he finally said. "Humans operate as individuals. They disagree. They argue. They fight among themselves constantly." The silence on the other end was unnerving. "Then how do they function?" one of the elders demanded. Dravkan struggled to put it into words. I do not know. They should not be able to advance like this. They should have collapsed under their own conflicts. And yet they are one of the most dangerous species we have ever encountered." A new voice, deeper and colder, cut through the communication. It was Grand Strategist Vornas, the one who had advocated for the extermination of humanity before they could become a threat. "If they do not have a hive mind, that makes them even more unpredictable. Even more dangerous." Dravkan's hands clenched. He knew what was coming next. "We cannot allow such a species to exist. Prepare for war." The unpredictable test. Dravkan shut off the communicator, his mind spinning. If he returned now, the invasion would begin. Millions would die. He needed proof. Something that could convince the High Council that humans were not a threat to be destroyed. He needed a test. The next morning, Dravkan followed two humans, the same men he had seen arguing on the street. If there was any hidden telepathic connection, he would find it now. They walked separate paths, no longer angry but not speaking to each other. There was no connection between them. Dravkan had seen enough. But as he turned to leave, something happened that shook him to his core. One of the men, the older one, suddenly collapsed. His body went limp, falling onto the sidewalk. The other man, his enemy just the night before, rushed to his side. "Somebody call an ambulance," the man shouted, frantically trying to wake the fallen stranger. Within seconds, dozens of humans stopped what they were doing to help. Some pulled out communication devices, others knelt beside the man, checking his pulse. A woman took off her jacket, rolling it into a pillow to cushion his head. Dravkan could only watch in stunned silence. These humans had no hive link. No shared mind. And yet, the moment one of them fell, they all stood together. A realization hit him with the force of a collapsing star. Humans did not need a hive mind. They chose to stand together. This was something the Zulkor could never comprehend. The hive mind forced unity. Forced obedience. Forced sacrifice. But humans? Humans were free to be selfish. To fight. To hate. To turn their backs on each other. And yet, they didn't. Not when it mattered. Dravkan had seen enough. He turned, walking quickly back to his hidden ship. He had a report to deliver. And he would tell them the truth. The Zulkor had been afraid of the wrong thing. It wasn't their technology. It wasn't their numbers. It was their ability to stand together, without ever being forced to. And if the High Council still chose war, then they would be making the greatest mistake of their existence. Dravkan could feel the weight of his discovery pressing against his mind. If he returned to the Zulkor High Council with this information, it wouldn't stop the war, it would confirm their worst fears. They had always assumed that true power came from absolute control. If a species had no control, no forced unity, they should have fallen into ruin. And yet, humans thrived. They didn't need a hive mind. They chose to stand together. To the Zulkor, that was more terrifying than anything else. Dravkan had to be sure. If he could prove, beyond all doubt, that humans had no hidden telepathic connection, perhaps he could convince the council to reconsider. And there was only one way to do that. He needed a test. A direct experiment. He needed a human. The abduction. Dravkan scouted the streets, searching for someone who wouldn't be missed right away. He settled on Jake Carter, a mechanic in his mid-40s, working late into the night at a dimly lit garage. Dravkan watched him from the shadows. He saw no signs of a Hive link, no sudden shifts in behavior, no synchronized thoughts. But he needed proof. The moment Jake stepped outside, wiping oil from his hands, Dravkan struck. A pulse of energy hit Jake in the chest, rendering him unconscious before he could react. Dravkan moved quickly, dragging him into a nearby alleyway and activating a teleportation device. In an instant, they were aboard Dravkan's hidden ship, floating just outside Earth's atmosphere. Jake was secured to a hovering examination table, still unconscious. Dravkan activated the restraints and adjusted the scanners. If humans had any kind of hidden connection, a subconscious signal, an untraceable frequency, he would find it. The interrogation begins. Jake groaned, his head lolling to the side as he woke. He blinked against the bright blue light of the lab, his mind struggling to catch up with his surroundings. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. His eyes landed on Dravkan, who had dropped his human disguise. Jake froze. "Okay," Jake said slowly, taking in the sight of the tall, gray-skinned alien before him. "Either I had one too many beers, or this is actually happening." Dravkan stepped closer, his 4 black eyes unblinking. "You are aboard my vessel." Jake scoffed. "Yeah, no kidding. You mind letting me go? I've got work in the morning." Dravkan ignored him. "You are part of a species that has puzzled my people for centuries. We have watched you expand, advance, survive, despite your lack of unity. Despite your constant disagreements. This defies all logic." Jake arched an eyebrow. "So, what? You abducted me to ask about teamwork?" Dravkan leaned forward. "I need to know the truth. Are you connected? Do your people share thoughts? Is there a hidden link we cannot detect?" Jake snorted. "A hive mind? Us?" He burst out laughing, shaking his head. "Buddy, we can't even agree on pizza toppings." Dravkan studied him carefully. "Then how do you function?" Jake gave him a tired look. "We fight, we argue, sure. But when it matters, we show up for each other." Dravkan narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Jake sighed, tilting his head back against the table. "Look, we're not perfect. We don't have some magic connection telling us what to do. But we have something better." Dravkan waited. Jake smirked. "Choice." Dravkan frowned. "Choice?" Jake nodded. "We choose to help. We choose to fight. We choose to stand together, even when we don't have to. That's what makes us strong." Dravkan stared at him. His mind reeled. Humans weren't united by force. They were united by something far more powerful. And that realization sent a chill through him. The test results. Dravkan turned back to his scanner, activating a deep neural scan of Jake's brain. He expected to see some kind of network, some biological link that would confirm that humans shared a deeper connection. But there was nothing. Jake's brain was independent. No signals, no telepathic waves, no hive link. And still, his kind had conquered space. Still, his kind stood together. The Zulkor had assumed that power came from control, from unity enforced by a single will. But humanity was proof that true strength came from the ability to choose. Jake grinned up at him. "So, Doc. What's the verdict?" Dravkan shut off the scanner. His voice was quiet. "You are free to go." Jake blinked. "Wait, what?" Dravkan deactivated the restraints. Jake hesitated, rubbing his wrists before cautiously stepping off the examination table. Just like that? Jake asked. Dravkan turned away. His mind was racing. He had everything he needed. Proof that humans were unlike anything the Zulkor had ever encountered. But now, he had a choice to make. If he reported this to the High Council, they would take it as confirmation that humanity was an even greater threat than they had feared. And the war would begin. Unless he didn't report it. Unless he lied. Dravkan turned to Jake. You will remember none of this. Jake frowned. I will if I tell my buddies. Dravkan sighed. Your people do not believe in such things. Your story will be dismissed. Jake shrugged. Fair point. Dravkan stepped forward, lowering his voice. Tell me, Jake Carter. If you knew an attack was coming, would your people stand together? Jake didn't even hesitate. Every damn time. Dravkan exhaled slowly. Then he made his decision. He would not report the truth. Because if the High Council declared war on humanity, they would not win. And Dravkan had no intention of being on the wrong side of history. Dravkan sat in his dimly lit ship, staring at the neural scan results of Jake Carter. Every analysis, every test confirmed the truth: humans had no hive mind. They had something worse. They had free will. The Zulkor had built their empire on absolute unity. No individual thoughts, no dissent, no deviation from the collective mind. That was how they conquered, how they controlled. Every being moved in harmony, directed by a singular, unwavering purpose. And yet, humans, fractured, divided, argumentative humans, had defied every law of logic and nature. Dravkan had studied 1,000 species, but none were like them. They fought wars against each other. They sabotaged their own progress. They built civilizations, only to burn them down. And yet, they survived. No, they thrived. Dravkan exhaled, his fingers tightening over the control panel. The High Council would never accept this truth. If they knew humans had no enforced unity, if they understood that humans chose to stand together when it mattered, they would not hesitate. Humanity would be destroyed. A dangerous decision. Jake sat on a nearby bench in the ship, arms crossed. So, what now? You gonna wipe my memory, or do I get a free ride home? Dravkan ignored him. His mind was consumed by one thought. I cannot let my people go to war with them. If the Zulkor launched an attack, they would never understand what hit them. Not because humans had better weapons. Not because they had superior strategy. But because they were unpredictable. They adapted. They improvised. They made decisions that defied logic, all based on emotions, personal beliefs, and sheer stubbornness. The Zulkor hive mind could not comprehend an enemy that did not act as one, yet fought as if they were. Dravkan looked at Jake. You said something earlier. That humans stand together, even when they don't have to. Jake shrugged. Yeah. What about it? Dravkan's voice was quiet. Why? Jake let out a small chuckle. You just don't get it, do you? Dravkan shook his head. No. I don't. Jake leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. It's simple, really. We don't always agree. Hell, we barely get along most days. But when something threatens us, when something comes along that's bigger than all our petty differences, we put all that aside. Dravkan narrowed his eyes. Because you are forced to? Jake smirked. No. Because we choose to. Dravkan stiffened. That word again. Choice. He thought of the Zulkor hive mind, how they obeyed without question, moved without hesitation. They never needed to make decisions. Their collective will ensured every action was in perfect harmony. But humans? Humans chose. And that made them uncontrollable. If the Zulkor fought them, it would not be a war. It would be annihilation. And not for the humans. Betrayal or salvation? Dravkan took a slow breath. My people will come. If they see what I have seen, they will fear you. And if they fear you, they will strike first. Jake's smirk faded. And I'm guessing you're not exactly high on their trust list if you start telling them we're just a bunch of idiots who happen to be good at working together? Dravkan turned away. If I tell them the truth, they will not hesitate. Humanity will be wiped out before you even know you were at war. Jake whistled low. Yeah. That'd be bad. Dravkan clenched his fists. He could not let that happen. He had two choices. Return and report the truth, dooming humanity to destruction. Lie to the High Council, and risk being branded a traitor. The logical choice was to obey. To follow the hive mind's will. But for the first time in his life, Dravkan found himself wanting something else. He wanted to choose. Just like humans. Dravkan turned to Jake. I will take you home. And I will report that humans are exactly what my people expect. Jake frowned. Which means? Dravkan's expression darkened. That you are too unpredictable. Too unstable. Too weak to be considered a threat. Jake chuckled. Gotta say, for an alien, you're a pretty damn good liar. Dravkan didn't respond. He had made his decision. And there was no going back. The warning. As Jake prepared to be sent back to Earth, he hesitated. So, what happens if your people don't buy your story? Dravkan exhaled. They will believe what they want to believe. But if war ever comes, I will have done everything in my power to delay it. Jake extended a hand. Well, if it means anything, I appreciate it. Dravkan looked at the outstretched hand. He had studied human customs, but this was different. This was a choice. Slowly, he reached out, gripping Jake's hand firmly. Jake grinned. See? You're learning already. With a flash of blue light, Jake disappeared, teleported back home. Dravkan stood alone in his ship. The weight of his decision pressed heavily upon him. He had betrayed his people. Lied to the High Council. And yet, for the first time in his life, he felt free. Dravkan sat in silence aboard his ship, staring at the empty space where Jake Carter had just stood. He had made his choice. He had lied to the Zulkor High Council. He had told them what they wanted to hear, that humans were too unpredictable to be a real threat, that they were too chaotic to be organized, too fragile to be worth fearing. But deep down, Dravkan knew the truth. Humans weren't weak. They were dangerous in ways the Zulkor could never understand. They didn't need a hive mind. They didn't need enforced unity. They chose to stand together. And now, that truth would be tested. Because the Zulkor fleet was already on its way to Earth. The first strike. Dravkan's communicator blinked. A direct transmission from Grand Strategist Vornas. Dravkan. Your report has been received. Your findings confirm our suspicions. Humanity is unpredictable, chaotic, and therefore, a danger to all ordered civilizations. Dravkan's stomach twisted. He knew what was coming next. The fleet has already begun its approach to their homeworld. We must strike before they evolve further. Before they become a true threat. Dravkan clenched his fists. This is a mistake. Vornas's voice remained cold and absolute. No, scientist. The mistake would be allowing them to continue unchecked. You are ordered to return immediately. Your mission is complete. The transmission cut off. Dravkan exhaled, his 4 eyes darting to the navigation screen. The Zulkor fleet had already passed Jupiter's orbit. They would arrive at Earth in less than an hour. And when they did, humanity would never see the attack coming. Dravkan had one last choice to make. Warning the humans. Dravkan's fingers flew over the console, overriding his ship's protocols. He had to warn them. He activated the long-range communicator, tapping into Earth's primitive satellite systems. He needed someone who would listen. Someone who would act. There was only one choice. Jake Carter. A moment later, a grainy image appeared on the screen. Jake, sitting at his garage, a cold beer in his hand, looked up in shock. "You again? Damn, I was hoping that was just a dream." Dravkan's voice was urgent. "Jake. There is no time. My people are coming. They will be here in less than an hour." Jake's face turned serious. "Wait. What?" Dravkan took a deep breath. "An attack. A full invasion. You need to warn your leaders. Your people need to prepare." Jake stared at him for a long moment, and then did something Dravkan did not expect. He laughed. Dravkan blinked. "Why are you laughing?" Jake shook his head, chuckling. "Man, you really don't get us, do you?" Dravkan frowned. "Explain." Jake set his beer down. "You think we need a warning? You think we need time to prepare?" He stood up, stretching his arms. Dravkan narrowed his eyes. "You don't understand. The Zulkor have never lost a battle. They will come in full force, with ships, weapons." Jake smirked. "And we'll beat them." Dravkan stiffened. "How?" Jake cracked his knuckles. "Because we don't fight like you do." He grabbed his phone and started dialing. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta call some people." Dravkan watched in disbelief. Jake wasn't afraid. And that's when he realized something. Jake had known this day would come. All humans had. They had always known they weren't alone in the universe. They had always suspected that one day, something would come for them. And instead of fearing it, they had been waiting for it. The battle begins. The Zulkor fleet emerged from hyperspace, descending toward Earth with terrifying precision. Their warships, sleek, black, and pulsing with energy, spread into formation, preparing to strike at key locations. High above the planet, the invasion order was given. Attack. But something was wrong. The humans weren't panicking. There were no distress signals. No mass evacuations. Instead, something unexpected happened. The moment the ships entered Earth's atmosphere, humans fought back. Not with conventional weapons. Not with superior technology. They fought back with everything. Hackers jammed their communications. Fighter jets scrambled from secret bases, engaging in aerial combat. Civilians, ordinary people, picked up whatever they had and resisted. Armies that had been enemies just weeks ago stood side by side, defending their planet. The Zulkor fleet wasn't prepared. They had expected panic. Surrender. Chaos. Instead, they got resistance. Dravkan watched from his ship, his chest tightening. It was happening. The Zulkor had underestimated humanity. And now, they were paying the price. A fatal mistake. Inside the flagship of the Zulkor fleet, Grand Strategist Vornas was livid. This is impossible. They should be surrendering. They should be afraid. A subordinate turned, eyes wide with panic. "Sir, they aren't following any pattern. Their attacks are random. Unpredictable. We can't counter them." Vornas gritted his teeth. "Increase firepower. Destroy everything. Outside, explosions lit up the sky as the Zulkor ships unleashed their full arsenal. Cities burned, the ground trembled, and still humanity refused to fall. Dravkan saw it all. The humans had no hive mind, no singular strategy. And yet, they were winning. Because they didn't need perfect unity. They had something stronger. They had willpower. They had adaptability. They had a reason to fight. And Dravkan knew, at that moment, that the Zulkor had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. The Zulkor fleet was in chaos. Their war strategy, perfectly synchronized, efficient, and calculated, was failing. The humans didn't fight like any other species. They didn't follow predictable formations. They didn't react in logical ways. They fought in every way possible, with every tool available. And worst of all, they refused to break. Dravkan watched from the shadows of his cloaked ship, his heart pounding as explosions rippled across Earth's surface. The Zulkor High Council had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed that humanity's lack of a hive mind made them weak. But it made them unstoppable. The human counterattack. On the ground, the resistance was unlike anything the Zulkor had ever faced. Hackers hijacked enemy drones, turning them against their own fleet. Farmers armed with hunting rifles and homemade explosives took down scouting patrols. Firefighters braved burning cities to rescue the wounded. Civilians, young and old, stood side by side, refusing to surrender. Every time a Zulkor force advanced, humans found a way to push back. They didn't fight because they were ordered to. They fought because they chose to. And that choice made them stronger than any hive mind ever could. The Zulkor began to break. Inside the command center of the Zulkor flagship, panic was spreading. Grand Strategist Vornas stood rigid, his dark eyes locked onto the battle unfolding below. "This isn't possible," he growled. "They should be broken by now. They should be surrendering." A subordinate, trembling, turned toward him. "Sir, they do not break. They fight as individuals. Their attacks are disorganized, but they adapt faster than we can counter." Vornas slammed a fist onto the console. "Then destroy them all. Burn their cities. Wipe them out." But it was too late. The Zulkor weren't just fighting a species. They were fighting an idea. And ideas cannot be destroyed. Dravkan's choice. Dravkan's hands clenched. He had known this would happen. He had tried to stop it. Now, there was only one thing left to do. He had to end the war himself. His fingers flew across his ship's control panel, accessing the Zulkor fleet's central command system. Dravkan was a scientist, not a warrior. But he knew the hive mind better than anyone. If he could disrupt their synchronization, even for a moment, he could shatter their entire formation. A single weakness. A single flaw. That's all humans needed. The sabotage. Dravkan activated a high-frequency pulse, transmitting a false emergency directive to every Zulkor warship. "Retreat immediately. The humans have developed a countermeasure to the hive mind. Their technology is capable of dismantling our connection." It was a lie. But Dravkan had learned something from humans. Sometimes, a well-placed lie was more powerful than the truth. The collapse of the Zulkor fleet. One by one, the Zulkor ships hesitated. Their pilots, connected through a single mind, felt a ripple of doubt. Was it true? Had the humans really developed a way to dismantle their hive connection? Doubt spread like a virus. And doubt was something the Zulkor had never been trained to handle. They had never fought a war where they had to think for themselves. And that hesitation became their downfall. Human forces, seeing their enemy falter, pushed harder. A fleet of fighter jets tore through the wavering enemy lines. Ground troops launched a final assault on the retreating forces. Civilian militias struck at supply chains, cutting off reinforcements. The Zulkor fleet, overwhelmed and disorganized, broke. Ships turned and fled, abandoning the battlefield. The unstoppable empire had been defeated. By a species that wasn't supposed to stand a chance. By a species that didn't need a hive mind. By a species that chose to fight. Dravkan's betrayal exposed. Inside the flagship, Grand Strategist Vornas roared in fury. Find the source of that transmission. Find the traitor. A moment later, his subordinate turned, eyes wide in horror. Sir, it was Dravkan. Vornas froze. Then, his expression darkened. Bring me his head. Dravkan's final stand. Dravkan had known this moment would come. His people would never forgive him. He had betrayed the Zulkor hive mind. But he had also saved them. If the invasion had continued, the Zulkor would have been wiped out. They had underestimated humans. And that mistake had cost them everything. Now, he had one last choice to make. Run? Or stand with the humans? Dravkan looked at Earth. Looked at the species that had taught him what it meant to choose. And he made his decision. He would never return to the hive. He would never be one of them again. For the first time in his life. He was truly free. The Zulkor High Council had already declared Dravkan a traitor. It had been hours since the Zulkor fleet had been forced to retreat from Earth. The destruction they had caused was enormous, but humans had fought back with everything they had. They had shown the Zulkor that they were more than just a disorganized species, they were a force that could not be beaten by brute strength alone. Dravkan stood alone in the depths of his ship, his eyes fixed on Earth below. The fight had ended. But the consequences were only just beginning. The aftermath. From his position above the planet, Dravkan could see the aftermath of the battle. The human cities, wounded but not broken, stood as testaments to their resilience. As the Zulkor fleet withdrew, human forces moved in to repair the damage. Soldiers, doctors, engineers, and volunteers flooded the streets, helping the wounded and rebuilding the shattered areas. There was no confusion. No panic. Just unity. Dravkan watched in awe as humans, despite their earlier differences, were now united in the face of a common enemy. They worked together, side by side, without a collective mind telling them to do so. They did it out of choice. As he looked at Earth, he realized that this was the true strength of humanity. It wasn't their technology. It wasn't their strategy. It wasn't their numbers. It was their ability to choose. To act not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to. Dravkan's decision. Dravkan knew what would happen next. The Zulkor High Council would demand his return. They would punish him for his betrayal and his choice to side with humanity. They would not forgive him for what he had done. And yet, he couldn't go back. Not after everything he had witnessed. Dravkan's decision was final. He would stay on Earth. He had already made the ultimate sacrifice by turning against his people, but it felt like the right one. The Zulkor would never understand. They would never see the beauty in humanity's ability to choose. And so, with his heart heavy but resolute, Dravkan initiated the destruction of his ship's core. The technology that powered his vessel was now compromised, ensuring he could never return to the Zulkor. His ties to the hive mind were gone. His future with the Zulkor was severed. He had no other choice but to move forward. A human choice. The next day, Dravkan found himself on the streets of a small human town. He walked among them, no longer in hiding. His alien appearance caused some to stop and stare, but there was no fear. Only curiosity. A group of humans passed by him, glancing over. The one in the front, an older man with graying hair, looked him up and down before nodding. "You're one of them, aren't you?" the man said, his voice kind but firm. Dravkan hesitated, unsure of how to answer. After everything, could he even still call himself a Zulkor? But the man smiled, placing a hand on Dravkan's shoulder. "You're safe here. You don't have to hide anymore." And just like that, Dravkan felt the weight of his isolation lift. For the first time since he had left his people, he felt like he had found a place where he truly belonged. In that moment, he realized something profound: humanity's greatest strength wasn't just their ability to fight. It was their ability to forgive. The humans didn't hold his past against him. They saw him not as an enemy, but as a fellow being. A lesson in freedom. As the days passed, Dravkan learned more about human life. He worked with humans, fixing machines, building homes, helping others. He didn't speak much, but he observed. He saw how they argued, how they stumbled, how they fell down. But more importantly, he saw how they got back up. There was something deeply human about their imperfections. They didn't hide from them. They didn't need to be perfect. They just kept going. And in that, Dravkan saw the power of choice. Humans could choose to be selfish. They could choose to be cruel. But they could also choose to be compassionate, to help one another, and to stand for something greater than themselves. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always fair. But the human heart had an incredible resilience, something Dravkan had never understood before. And that was what set them apart from the Zulkor. The Zulkor were a species of control, of uniformity, of harmony enforced by the mind. But humanity? Humanity was something more. They were a species that, despite their flaws, chose to come together in the face of adversity. They chose to stand strong when they had every reason to fall apart. And that, Dravkan realized, was what made them unstoppable. The true strength of humanity. As the final moments of his journey unfolded, Dravkan found himself standing on a hill overlooking a bustling human city, the sun setting in the distance. He was free. For the first time in his life, he felt like he truly understood what it meant to live. He wasn't controlled by the hive mind anymore. He had chosen his own path. And he knew now, freedom wasn't just about being free of control. It was about choosing who you wanted to be. Humanity's greatest gift wasn't their technology or their strength. It was their ability to choose. And with that, Dravkan smiled.